Welcome back to the 10-minute Bitcoin show. We're going to get you out of here before the next block. Everyone tells me I'm indecisive, but I'm not so sure. Today, we're going to talk again about forks, about implementations, and about shitcoins. I've been seeing a lot of people lately talking about Zcash. There seems to be a motivated push to stir up interest in Zcash or something like that. There must have been a pump or something. And guys, these things, they're always coordinated. Look, let me break this down for you. So if you haven't been in Bitcoin for a very long time, or even if you have, I don't know, there's a lot of people that have been around this stuff for a long time and have either benefited from being associated with some of these shitcoin scams or have just been around so long that they don't even realize that this is the water that they swim in. Bitcoin, we talk about this a lot on the 10-minute Bitcoin show. Bitcoin was released as free and open source software under the MIT license by Satoshi. That means that anybody can change the code, anybody can use the code, anybody can monetize the code. You could do whatever you want with the code, right? Nobody can stop you from taking the Bitcoin code, changing the name of the software, changing a couple of small arbitrary things, and creating your own competing money protocol implementation. But I've always rejected this idea, or at least for a while now, I've rejected this idea of this many competing monies fallacy. It doesn't make sense to have hundreds of competing money network protocols with hundreds of competing tokens. I think largely a lot of the other cryptocurrencies we have out there have been scams in the sense that they've been fraudulent because they prey on people's inability to understand the fact that money is a tool that requires like network effect, and that tool is only as useful as its network, and we don't need lots of competing monies. We have this open source money protocol implementation known as Bitcoin Core. That's its reference implementation. And of course, people are free to create their own copies, their own forks of the code. No one could stop someone from doing that. But what always inevitably ends up happening with like these Bitcoin forks is that first of all, they change things that would never get through the open source change review process. A lot of times they're very arbitrary things, like for example, changing the target block time, changing the block size, changing the token supply. Not just changing the token supply, but also changing the history of the ledger, right? And in doing so, you're demonstrating usually pretty clearly, a lot of the times, that they're pre-mining, meaning that they're allocating like a certain percentage of the token supply to the organization that's creating the token from the start of the chain. Sometimes they're more sneaky about it though. So that's what the Ethereum Foundation did. They just basically gave themselves a bunch of tokens and sold them to early investors. But like what Zcash did was a little bit more sneaky. And you don't always have to do a pre-mine either. You can basically just launch a token early on that no one knows about and no one is using, and just mine a bunch of it and accumulate a ton of it for essentially nothing, right? So it doesn't have to be a pre-mine. You can technically pre-mine a proof of work coin if you're motivated enough. But anyway, what Zcash did was they created this essentially tax on the network where anytime there was a transaction, 20% of the fee from that transaction would go into this slush fund that the developers had basically created for themselves. And over time, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this ended up concentrating like something like 10% of the total supply in the hands of the developers behind Zcash. That creates moral hazard. That creates like this it's in my mind, it's functionally no different than just pre-mining the coin, right? Like you've instituted a protocol level tax that just puts money in your pocket, and you've accumulated a ton of these tokens from essentially doing nothing. I don't think that the argument could be made very strongly that is somehow deserved. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. I think if you really needed the ZK Snarks shielding thing, you could add that to Bitcoin, right? It's obvious that there was not a lot of attempt. There was more, people are more interested in creating their own token than they are of actually trying to like improve the existing money protocol. I think that we could maybe get things like ZK rollups and ZK snarks on other layers of Bitcoin, maybe even eventually get that natively on Bitcoin with like smarter on-chain scripting like Simplicity. It'd probably be possible to implement stuff like that on Bitcoin with more flexible and expressive scripting like Simplicity gives us. But the idea that you need like a competing money protocol that is extrinsic to the existing money protocol with its own token, and the fact that you're completely forking the token history off as its own thing, to me it demonstrates just a complete lack of seriousness in terms of those projects actually being serious attempts to be competing money protocols. Of course, no one can stop you from doing that, but where it starts to get really weird is when you have situations like you see right now. If you just like scroll through For You and you're in any way loosely associated with crypto, right, on X, your feed is going to be slam full of probably venture capitalists or insiders, who knows, trying to convince you that Zcash is the thing now, that you need to buy Zcash. It fixes all of Bitcoin's problems. It's just a great token. I don't know, these cycles, they repeat themselves like every 4 or 5 years, and some tokens die off and never come back, and some go through like these pumps where who knows what's going on there, whether it's wash trading, whether there's somebody with a big bag of those tokens that accumulated them for pennies on the dollar, trying to build up hype to create exit liquidity for their token. I don't know. I'm of the opinion that Bitcoin is really the only serious money protocol, but it's also really the only attempt at a fair launch of this money token protocol system that we're using. I don't see why, if you really needed, if you were really truly dissatisfied with like Bitcoin Core, why wouldn't you fork its UTXO set? Why would you reset the monetary history? At the very least, you're maintaining some network compatibility there if you're forking the UTXO set. But to just completely start the UTXO set over from Genesis, I don't see any reason to ever want to do that outside of shenanigans. Because you're at least maintaining, well, I don't know, theoretically, you might not always be able to airdrop depending on how much different your system is. But so maybe forking the UTXO set isn't always possible, but it's an interesting discussion, because in my opinion, the only reason that you would ever want a competing money protocol implementation is out of dissatisfaction with the reference client's change process, right? If you really think that Bitcoin needs like ZK snarks or ZK rollups or some other layer 1 protocol change, then that would be your driving motivation to want to start up a competing protocol level base layer token implementation. Otherwise, right, you should be trying to get those changes into Bitcoin. If you really think that that is the best way to do things, you should be trying to get those changes into Bitcoin at the base layer protocol, because it's open source, and that's how we make it better. And because of the fact that it's a network, and the network is inherently tied to a token with monetary value, there's just so much moral hazard that I refuse to overlook. I know there's a lot of people out there that like to pretend like it doesn't matter, it's a free market. Very often these things are done, in my opinion, deceptively. I think if we're honest about what money is, if we're honest about what problem Bitcoin is trying to solve, if we're honest about the way that open source software works, the way that protocols work, the way that the Bitcoin network grows in value as it grows in size, we don't want to fracture that network. We don't want to split that network. We want to keep the distributed consensus together, and we do that by contributing to the reference implementation. And of course, maybe there's future scenarios where it doesn't make sense to contribute to the reference implementation. We need a new implementation, but I don't think we're there today. I certainly don't think we're there today. You guys know I've said that for a long time. But yeah, I don't give a pass to the shitcoin salesman, because I think what they do is largely deceptive fraud. And that's just my opinion, right?